Okay, welcome back, everyone. Last lecture of the semester. We made it. Hopefully we can get through this one without any crazy weather. That was so weird. Let me share my screen. Share, and let me make it big. Big. And let me make myself a little bit bigger. Hopefully my head won't block as much this time. I'm going to be changing how I format that in future classes so that that won't happen. But at least you guys do have access to all of these lecture slides on Canvas. So if my head is ever in the way of something and you're wondering what that is, remember you can always just pull up those lecture slides on Canvas, and that's where you're supposed to be writing your comments and questions anyways. So yeah, do two things at once, right? So as I said, yeah, it's our last lecture, which, you know, it's a bittersweet moment, but it's probably pretty sweet for you guys in that you made it through a science class, right? Congrats on you. You know, it wasn't as probably not exactly what you expected, but probably a little bit more fun than if you were to do like physics or chemistry or something like that. So hopefully you got something out of it. And today is going to be the finale of the plants for basic plant science, in that we're going to talk about the angiosperms. So last class, which was long, probably the longest class of the course. In part, it's so long because we have 4th of July off that Monday, and so I'm forced to kind of squish things together and not teach all the things, right? Like I only taught you guys about lycopods and ferns. Yeah, but it was long. It was super long, and I apologize for that, but at least it was pre-recorded so you guys could take breaks. So we did those spore shedding plants, the lycopods and ferns. We did the seed shedding plants, some of them, gymnosperms, including cycads, ginkgos, and conifers. All of these things, right? All of these things, which are vascular plants, which means sporophyte plant is dominant, right? In all of these, lycopods, ferns, and the gymnosperms. And today we're going to finish the course out by finishing the last of the vascular plants, which are the seed shedding plants, which are the angiosperms. And oh, there's little parentheses there, whoopsie. We'll talk about the significance of angiosperms, the habits and the habitats that they live in, and then a little bit more about flowers, because we did cover flowers in the flower lecture, but we'll learn just a little bit more about them. And of course, we can't not talk about alternation of generations, right? But we have to talk about the conidophyte plants and the sporophyte plants and angiosperms. And we'll finish out with agents of pollination, which sounds like a exciting action movie, and maybe it should be. Agents of pollination. Okay, so vascular plants. We have covered most of them, right? We already covered the spore shedding vascular plants. We already covered the gymnosperms, and then yay, this is our last stop at the angiosperms. Right, here we go, last stop. We've seen this before, that the ovule and the seed are a huge evolutionary leap in the plant world, because most plants that live on Earth have seeds. And so we've seen this before in this pie chart. The green represents all of the seed plants. And we've seen this before in that if we were to take the green part of this pie and look at just that, so this is only seed plants, the majority of the seed plants are our flowering plants, or angiosperms, right? This is just a little recall, because we did talk about this a bit last class too, in that gymnosperms and angiosperms both have ovules, and gymnosperms and angiosperms both have seeds. But the difference is that for the gymnosperms, the ovules and later the seeds are not enclosed in a structure. The ovules are not enclosed in an ovary. The seeds are not enclosed in a fruit. In the gymnosperms, they are visible with your naked eye. They are exposed to the environment. But in the angiosperms, which come from the Greek angion, which is vessel, and sperma, which in this still refers to seed, means seed in a vessel, which also means ovule in a vessel, because an ovule is ovule until it becomes a seed, right? And so the ovules are enclosed in an ovary, and later the seeds will be enclosed in a fruit. So in angiosperms, the ovules and the seeds are not, in angiosperms, the ovules and the seeds are not exposed to the environment. They are in something, right? The ovules are in an ovary, the seeds are in a fruit. This is just to hit that message home, right? In this drawing, the blue thing here and here, oops, are ovules. And notice in the gymnosperm ovule, it's not inside of anything, right? It's out, just out and exposed. But in the angiosperms, it's surrounded by this red thing here in this drawing, which is an ovary. So the ovule's inside an ovary, which gives the contents of the ovule better protection. And what's in the ovule? Well, eventually what's in the ovule is a female gametophyte with egg, right? But so not only is the female gametophyte plant with egg better protected because of the walls of the ovary, but the ovule of the angiosperms also has two integuments, two layers, as versus one integument in the gymnosperms. So that's better protection too. Okay. Why are angiosperms important? Well, first we have to just mention briefly, you guys don't need to know the names of the phyla of this phylum, but just so you know, because you'll see it in your book, angiosperms are in the phylum Magnoliophyta, aka Anthophyta, depending on what resource you're using. And the name for that phylum comes from magnolia trees, which are common in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, and a lot of different other places. All members of the angiosperms bear flowers, every single one. So even if you see a plant, like, let's just put it this way, it just means if you're an angiosperm, it means at some point in your life cycle, you will make a flower. Doesn't mean you have flowers on you all the time, right? But it just means that at some point in your life cycle, you will make a flower. So every angiosperm, all 370,000 of them, make flowers. And right, and this is just to remind you, right, those ovules and later the seeds are inside of things, right? The ovules are inside of ovaries, the seeds are inside of fruits. Okay, so I just said there's what, almost 370,000 flowering plants, and they all make flowers. And what that means for us is that there's a ton of flower diversity. I even got a couple flowers here for you guys, just to, you know, brighten up the mood. Little guy here. So there's tons of flowers. I mean, there's like 370,000 of them, right? So a lot of different diversity, different shapes, different colors, different sizes, different smells, all that. So really, really cool. There's just a few here on this slide, right? Incredible diversity in flower form. So there's more to the significance of flowering plant evolution. So just to give you a little context, we're not going to go into it in great detail, but if we look at the fossil record and DNA analysis and things like that, we estimate that flowering plants appeared on Earth around 130 million years ago, give or take. You can see here, just to give you some context, I'll use black. Right, look, here's our, oh gosh, here is our mosses, right? All the bryophytes, liverworts and hornworts. And they showed up, you know, around 450, 475 million years ago. Then you have your ferns, right? Your spore shedding vascular plants. Those show up around 410 million years ago in the fossil record. Then ginkgo, which we learned about last class, right? This one of the gymnosperms, you know, roughly 280 million years ago, give or take. conifers, around, like, it's hard to say, but let's say similar to the ginkgo, but yeah, like around the same time. Cycads, a little bit later. Notice the Jurassic period is right here. So dinosaurs would have had the ability to eat like ferns and ginkgo, maybe some conifers, and definitely cycads, right? I'm getting distracted thinking about dinosaurs. The point is that, look, here's angiosperms, and they show up way later, right? Way later, only about 130 million years ago, give or take. But what's cool about that, the reason I'm pointing this out, and I just mentioned the Jurassic period, but the Jurassic period we think of as dinosaurs, but when things really started to get interesting and there was a lot of diversification of animals was in this Cretaceous period. And why that's interesting is because around 130 million years ago, based on the fossil record, is when we saw a huge increase in animal diversity. And this kind of is tied into that diversification of the flowering plants. So you can think of it as, look, it shows you here. You know, you have dinosaurs and things like that and birds. Then the first flowering plants show up. This creates a feedback system in that an animal will be choosing certain flowers over other flowers or certain seeds over certain other seeds to eat and consume. And it's going to put evolutionary pressure on plants and animals. And the result of that is we see a diversification of animals as well following the when flowering plants show up in the fossil record. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I can talk to you. But I just want to put it in context for like the time of when things are showing up. So nowadays, angiosperms dominate pretty much every part of the earth. There's these little different colors here are showing you different types of ecosystems, and yeah, we'll leave it at that. So angiosperms dominate pretty much everywhere except in those northern latitudes, which are shown here in purple. Remember last time when we talked about conifers, it says which is dominated by what? Well, it'll be a good prompt when you're looking at the slides later. But yeah, in those northern latitudes, it was the conifers that dominate, right? Because they've adapted to live in those cold and dry environments. But aside from the boreal forest, right, aside from those northern latitude forests, angiosperms dominate everywhere else. We've seen this several times now, but just to really hit it home, angiosperms are our primary food source when it comes to plants. They were the ones that allowed us to found human civilizations, right? In those domestication events that we talked about at the very first class, which some of them are shown here, right? And these are the ones that we highlighted in that very first class that helped humans around the world stop traveling and actually build civilizations. So rice, wheat, and corn are some of those cultivated plants that allowed humans to do this. And all of those are grasses, and all of those are flowering plants. So yes, grasses are flowering plants. Yes. And so the actual thing that we eat from rice, wheat, and corn are the fruits of those grasses, which is called a caryopsis. And you can see the fruits of those here. A little harder to see the corn fruits because they're on the cob, but you can see them better in this slide here. But even though we've talked about these three before, they are not the only ones that humans domesticated. I mean, there was a ton of cultivated plants. Cultivated and domesticated are kind of the same thing. It just means that you took a species of plant and you grew it for the purposes of eating or other things like shelter over time, and such that you're selecting the certain types of plants that let's say you eat a rice and you're like, I don't really like this rice so much. Then you eat another rice and you're like, ooh, this rice tastes way better. So you'll probably cultivate that type of rice and try to mimic that type of rice over time. That's what we mean by cultivation / domestication. But like, check out this map. Don't have time to go through every single thing on it, but look at all of the different cultivated plants that we still get to consume today. Just to highlight a few things. So if we were to look in that Near Eastern region, which is the Mediterranean and Northern Europe, Turkey, the Balkans, Pakistan, and Iran, you're looking at lots of different grasses. So barley, wheat, and other cereals, different beans, right? So like chickpea, lentil, garden pea, different roots. You got beet and carrot and turnip, different drupes, which are things with a solid seed in the middle. So like olives and cherry, plum, apricot. And then the list goes on. So many different things were brought about in that region of the world. You look at the Chinese region, some of the things to highlight are things like peaches also, bamboo, ginger, ginseng, gourds like squashes and pumpkins, tea, horseradish, etc. In the African continent, you're looking at coffee, okra, yams, sweet melons, and lots more. South Asia, you're looking at things like eggplant, mango, black pepper, which, I mean, can you imagine going a day without using pepper? I mean, I'm sorry, I use it in everything. Taro, mung bean, sesame, etc. And then in the Americas, which includes North, Central, and South America, quite a lot too. Although I will say a lot of things were not cultivated originally in North America. Most of the things from the Americas come from South America. So things like corn, peanuts, cashews, pineapple, papaya, avocado, red pepper, quinoa, cacao, etc. Whereas in North America, it was things like sunflower, strawberries, cranberries, tobacco, things like that. Just to give you an idea. There's tons of things that we eat thanks to angiosperms, and not only food, but things like oils and herbs and spices. So we really make our food interesting by adding all of these different spices to give good flavor. We also used angiosperm for shelter, both the kind of traditional shelters, but also more modern day shelters still use angiosperm wood. A lot of our clothing, if it is coming from a plant product, is coming from an angiosperm, in that it's cotton, linen, hemp, etc. We also use angiosperm flowers and other plant parts to make dyes that we use to dye our clothing. We use it for fuel. We make wine and beer out of angiosperms. We make medicine and drugs out of angiosperms. We have cut flowers in our homes, right? Thanks to angiosperms and more. I could talk all day about what angiosperms do for us, but I won't. I'll spare you. What do they look like and where are they found? Habit is their form, and habitat is where they live. So what do they look like and where are they found? What do they look like? Everything, pretty much. Angiosperms can be herbs. Angiosperms can be shrubs. They can be trees. They can be vines, which are herbaceous, and lianas, which are woody vines. They can be epiphytes, right? We've come across this term a few times. If you're an epiphytic plant, you can be called an epiphyte, which is a plant that grows on other plants. So here we see these lovely orchids and other air plants growing on this tree. It can be aquatic in that they can live either floating on water or submerged in water, usually fresh water, but not always. And the book even highlights that they can be parasitic. Parasitic plants are cool. They're angiosperms. So they lack that green pigment, chlorophyll. So therefore, they cannot undergo photosynthesis. They cannot use the sunlight to make their own sugars. Instead, what parasitic plants do is they have these special roots, and the roots will grow into other plants that can do photosynthesis. And basically, they'll use those roots to basically take the products of photosynthesis, so sugars and other nutrients, to the parasitic plant. So this is one example. The book also shows another example, but this is a parasitic plant here called Monotropa uniflora, or the ghost pipe or ghost plant. This does occur naturally in the New Jersey, New York, Connecticut area. So you may have seen it before. And if you didn't know better, you may think this is maybe a mushroom, right? Because it's, you know, kind of small and white and fleshy, but it's actually a parasitic plant. Here's another example of a parasitic plant, and this parasitic plant is an example of the single largest flower on Earth. So this whole thing is one flower. There's another thing called another version of a corpse lily that is famous at different botanical gardens for being a very large flower. And that's true, that's a very large flower too, but I believe that one's an inflorescence. Have to look into that. But this one is a single flower, one single flower. And it's like 3 feet wide-ish, maybe even more, depending. And the reason it's called corpse lily is because this flower is actually fly pollinated, and when it smells almost like rotting meat, the flower. And so that attracts flies to it and pollinates it, I know. Anyways, though, this is also an example of a parasitic plant. This plant cannot do photosynthesis and therefore uses those special roots to get nutrients and sugars from other plants. Okay, so that's what they look like, pretty much everything. Where do they live, right? What habitats do they live in? So they live everywhere. Spoiler alert, everywhere, except in the northern latitudes, right? They're very sparse there. But in the temperate and tropical forests, dominated by angiosperms. Deserts, dominated by angiosperms. So remember that term xerophytic? We learned that in the conifer lab lecture. It means dry environments, so like deserts. Grasslands and savannas, dominated by angiosperms. Up in the mountains, that's what alpine means, alpine regions. You guessed it, dominated by angiosperms. Look at all these wildflowers in this alpine scene. Nice. Freshwater environments, yep, angiosperm. Saltwater environments is what I was mentioning before. If any of you have ever grown up down south in the USA or in parts of Central and South America, you may have seen these types of plants before, which are called mangroves. I think they also occur in Southeast Asia. But yeah, they're basically plants that grow in salt water along the coast, right? In like beachy environments. And so on the conifer lab, we learned that the tallest living trees are conifers. There's still some pretty tall angiosperms as well. So the tallest known angiosperms are these eucalyptus trees that are located in southeastern Australia. Their common name is mountain ash, and they can get about 330 feet tall, which is pretty big, and 70 feet wide, which you should be thinking, 70 feet wide, what does that mean about its growth? Right, tons of secondary growth. All right. They could be super tall. They could also be super small. So this is a type of plant, Lemnaceae, which is from the duckweeds. Is not to be confused with the ferns I showed you, those tiny little ferns, not to be confused with that, which is also called sometimes duckweed. But anyways, look at this bee. This is a bee standing on a mat of duckweed, just to give you an idea of how very small. And I think we may have highlighted this during the leaf lab, maybe, or lecture, to show you the different sizes of leaves. Yeah, I think I did. But this is a plant now that is kind of a problematic plant. It gets moved around via boats. And so now it basically occurs everywhere on Earth. Anyways, the point is very, very tall angiosperms, very, very small angiosperms, all different types of habits, and they live in all different habitats. So now we'll talk a little bit about flowers. So we already learned in lecture 4 that a flower is a specialized shoot system whose leaves are used for reproduction. And flowers have the sexual reproductive structures, that the male structures are called stamens, and the female structures are called pistil or carpels. Either one is fine. We saw this in lecture 4 as well, which showed us where what the parts of the pistil / carpels and the parts of the stamens were, right? But also showed us the petals and the sepals, which comprise the 4 whorls of a flower. So this is all review from lecture 4. Flowers are arranged in whorls, right? And the outermost whorl is the sepals. The second whorl is petals, and then stamens, and then pistils/carpels, right? So whorls mean circles. So we learned about that. And in lecture 4, we learned that flowers can be solitary, like on their own, aka borne singly, or you can have a group of flowers that are grouped together. And in that case, we call it an inflorescence. So this rose here shown on the left is an example of a solitary flower. And this agapanthus on the right is an example of an inflorescence. And you may recall that I also taught you that the sunflower should be called a sun inflorescence, right? Because it's not one flower. We did this in lecture 4 as well, talking about how to distinguish dicot flower versus a monocot flower, right? And so now these are going to be some new things. These are, we're just going to learn 4 new terms about flowers. So there's complete flowers are flowers that have all 4 whorls, right? So these are the whorls. If you're a flower that has all 4 whorls, we call you a complete flower. So I'll use yellow, right? Complete flowers, all 4 whorls. Here is a complete flower below. So you have the sepals, then you have the petals, then you have the stamens, and then you have the pistil in the middle, pistil or carpel. So this flower has all 4 whorls, therefore we can call it complete. Oops. Complete flowers have all 4 whorls. And if you're missing 1 or more whorls, you're called an incomplete flower. So in this case, this flower has no petals, even though it looks like petals, but in this case, the sepals look like petals and there's no petals on this. This is maybe not the best example, but let's put it this way, like here, I'll draw a flower on the side here. Look, let's say this is a flower. So here's its sepals, right? This is a different flower than the one shown. Here's its petals. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful flower that I'm drawing here. And it has a pistil, let's say. Oh, but no stamens, no stamens, incomplete flower, right? Because it doesn't have all 4 whorls. It's missing at least 1, in this case, stamens. Let's do another example here. Let's say this flower doesn't have any sepals. Let's say this flower just has petals. Ooh, that's a little bit better. And that this flower has stamens, right? And that this flower has a pistil. So in this case, it has petals, stamens, and pistil, aka carpels, but no sepals, missing a whorl, incomplete flower. Let's do one last one, right? Let's say that it's missing sepals, it only has petals. Say it only has petals and a pistil/carpel. Wow, well in this case, it's missing 2 whorls, still an incomplete flower, right? Okay. So complete flower has all 4 whorls, incomplete flower is missing 1 or more whorls. And there's 2 other terms to learn too, perfect flowers and imperfect flowers. So just so you don't get confused, because sometimes students get this confused, when you think about complete versus incomplete, in your brain, you should say whorled, right? Incomplete versus complete, it's about the whorls. Perfect versus imperfect is about sex structures. So if you're a perfect flower, you have both sex structures. You have stamens and pistils or carpels on a single flower. For example, if we look at this one again, this one is a complete flower, but this one has both stamens and pistil/carpels on it. So this, in addition to this being a complete flower because it has all 4 whorls, this is also a perfect flower because it has the stamens, right? Here they are. Here's another one. Here's another stamen, right? And it has the pistil/carpel. So it has both sex organs. This one, in addition to being complete, is also perfect. And if you think about it, it's kind of like by default, if you're a complete flower, it means you have all 4 whorls. So every complete flower is going to be perfect because they have to have both sex structures, right, in order to have all 4 whorls. If you're imperfect, it means you're missing either the stamens or the pistil/carpels. So if you only have the male flowers, if you only have the male structures, you could call the flower staminate, like kind of stands for stamens. And if you only have the female structures, you can call the flower pistillate or carpellate. You don't need to know those. Just, you might see that if you're looking in a field guide or something. But you do need to know perfect versus imperfect. Down here is an example of 2 imperfect flowers. Here, this flower only has, well, it has petals that we can see, but in terms of sex structures, it only has stamens, no pistil/carpel. Whereas over here, this one has a pistil/carpel and no stamens. And so therefore, it is imperfect. Let me do a little mini quiz here to help you guys understand what, yeah. Let's go through this first. So this was our bee. Remember this little, oh, I had to go way back. Remember this bee standing on these little plants? Okay. So believe it or not, when you look at those little plants, you might say, like, Rebecca said that all these plants make flowers because they're angiosperms, but I don't see any flower on that little tiny green plant. Well, there is one. So each of these little plants of this duckweed actually produces one incomplete perfect flower. So it's incomplete. I don't know if my head is blocking it, but it's incomplete because it doesn't have any petals and it doesn't have any sepals. So it's missing 2 whorls right there. But it's perfect because it does contain the male and female sex organs. So I'll show you where they are on the left here. There are the 2 stamens of the flower, and that little nubby thing is one top of one of the pistils/carpels. So just to remind you, complete flower has all whorls, incomplete flower is missing 1 or more whorls, perfect flower has both sex organs, imperfect flower has 1 or the other. And so just to do this quickly, to kind of, I'm going to quiz you here on, and you can answer at home by yourself to see if you're understanding. Here's a flower I'm drawing. It has sepals. It has petals. Those are the petals there. And it has a pistil. Oops, I skipped a whorl there. And it has stamens. So this flower has sepal, petals, pistil, and stamens. Stamens and pistil. Is this flower complete or incomplete? It has stamens, it has sepals, petals, stamens, and pistil. So it's complete because it has all 4 whorls. Is this flower that I just drew that has sepals, petals, stamens, and pistil perfect or imperfect? Well, it's perfect, right? Because it has both the stamens and the pistils. How about this? Let's do this. So this flower that I'm going to draw has sepals, and it has stamens, and it has a pistil. Is this flower complete or incomplete? So it has sepals, no petals, stamens, and pistils. So only 3 whorls. So we know it's incomplete. Is it perfect or imperfect? Well, we know it has sepals, no petals, stamens, and a pistil / carpel. So because it has both sex organs, we know it's perfect, right? So that's how your brain should be thinking when present these kind of things to you, so you don't get confused. Okay, alternation of generations in angiosperms. I cannot talk today. It's harder than it looks, but I just cannot talk. Okay, angiosperms are plants, flowering plants, and they therefore have a sporophyte generation and a gametophyte generation just because they're plants, right? So the sporophyte generation is dominant because angiosperms are vascular plants. And so the sporophyte generation is going to be the one that has that vasculature and has true roots, stems, and leaves. We've seen this before in the, I think, stem lecture, maybe the root lecture too, and probably the leaf lecture. But this is a representative flowering plant. We have its shoot system, we have its root system. And just to remind you, right, flower is part of the shoot system, but the leaves have been modified for reproduction, right? That's what we say about flowers. You can look at the definition of flower from earlier in today's lecture. The flowers make pollen, right? We learned about that when we did the flower lecture. Flowers make pollen. If you're a dicot flower, your pollen has 3 openings, shown here on the left. It's another way to tell dicots and monocots apart. So these are the 3 openings. Almost looks like a peace sign or something. And monocot flowers have only 1 opening. Monocot pollen only has 1 opening. As another way you could tell monocots and dicots apart. You may think, like, why would I ever use pollen to tell monocots and dicots apart when I can just count the flower parts? Well, because sometimes you might be looking like, let's say you're somebody who studies fossils and things, and you might be looking in dirt or rocks for evidence of plants, and you may only find the pollen. And that might be your only way to tell what kind of plants lived at that time. Pollen shape is very different and diverse depending on the species. So there's a lot of diversity in pollen shape. Here is some scanning electron microscope images of pollen of angiosperms. There's a lot of different diversity and a lot of weird looking things. Whenever I look at this, I always see, like, to me, this looks almost like a lizard or something like that. It's like a little flying saucer. Like, this kind of looks like an olive to me. And then, wait a minute, that one, this is, okay, it's supposed to be angiosperms pollen. But that is not from an angiosperm. That's Mickey Mouse. No, that's from gymnosperms. Get that out of here. Okay, we're good now. These are all the angiosperm ones. I gotta do it. I love the Mickey. Okay, so back to angiosperm reproduction. Angiosperm plants can be either monoecious or dioecious. Monoecious meaning that the plant. So I'm gonna write this real quick, because just so in case we're not all on the same page. Monoecious is a plant with both sex, both male and female. Let's make this wider if I can. Yeah, monoecious is a plant. Oh, I can't underline. With both male and female sex structures. DIOE, can I spell it? Is a plant with either male or female sex structures. So if you're a monoecious plant, you have on your plant both male and female sex structures. But that means that you can have either perfect flowers, so you could can have perfect flowers, because the perfect flowers have both male and female sex organs on them. But if you're a monoecious plant, you might have imperfect flowers on it, as long as it has both types of imperfect flowers. So has both staminate and pistillate, just to use those terms, pistillate flowers on one plant. So a monoecious plant may have imperfect flowers. That's okay though, as long as both of the flower types, the male flower with the male sex structures and the flower with the female sex structures, as long as both of those are present on that monoecious plant, the plant's still monoecious. However, if you're a dioecious plant, you can only have imperfect flowers and only one type. Only has only male or has only staminate or pistillate flowers on one plant. Right. So trying to hit this home so you guys understand what this slide is saying. So if you're a monoecious plant, you're a plant that has both male and female sex structures on one plant. And those sex structures could either be in a single flower, perfect flowers, or in two flowers, both types of imperfect flower on one plant. You're still monoecious. Dioecious plants can never have a perfect flower on them, because if they had that, they would be a monoecious plant. They can only have imperfect flowers on them, and they can only have one type, either the male bearing flowers, staminate, or the female ones. And just to remind you about what I mean when I say male reproductive structures and female reproductive structures, those are the stamens for the male, right? Anther and filament. And for the female, it's the pistil/carpels, which is made up of the stigma, the style, and the ovary. So both of these types of flowers exist, right? Like, so here on the left, you have perfect flower, has both the stamens and the pistil/carpels. Here is this, all of these things here are stamens, and then this pistil/carpels are in the middle. Whereas on this plant on the right here, it has imperfect flowers, right? Either female flowers with female sexual structures or flowers with male sexual structures. But in order for us to talk about angiosperm reproduction, I'm going to use a perfect flower for the sake of simplicity as we go through this angiosperm reproduction. So, okay, so here's a flower. Here's a flower. And on the flower, there are male reproductive structures, the stamens, and there are female reproductive structures, the carpels, right? And we already have learned the parts of these things in the flower lecture. The pistil or carpels is made up of a stigma, a style, and an ovule, which is inside of an ovary. And the stamens are the anther and the filament. And yes, so we already covered all of that in the flower lecture. So how does angiosperm reproduction work? Remember this from the flower lecture, right? The pistil has these parts. So here, the pistil is the whole structure inside of that red box. On the top of that structure, right, is the stigma, which I always say sticky stigma because that catches pollen. You can have a lot of diversity in what the stigma looks like. Sometimes curlicues, sometimes little pom-poms, sometimes it's branched. Here's some examples of real life. Oh, definitely pull up the slide so you can see the curlicue that my head is hiding. Oops, what happened there? Hold on. Something happened. I want to make sure I didn't mess that up. Here, whoa, here we are. Here. Okay. Hold on. Just want to make sure I'm not bringing this up because it would be unfortunate if I had to re-record this whole thing, which has happened in the past. Okay, share. Okay, yes, big. Technology. Okay, but for the, like, if you look at this drawing, this stigma here on the left is the one that looks the most like that drawing, right? And you can see top of that one even looks sticky, right? And that one even has little pollen grains on it. Actually, the one in the middle has little pollen grains on it too. I don't know if you can see. So here, each of these are the top of stigmas. And you see it has these little tiny dots all over. Those are pollen grains. Whoops. Those are pollen grains. Yeah. So the stigma is where the pollen grains are going to land. Then you have a style, which is a long thing that holds the stigma out of the flower. And then you have an ovary, which has inside of it one or more ovules, depending on the species. There's ovules there. We know that angiosperm ovules are inside of an ovary, and it's better protected because, so the ovules are better protected because of that, and also because the ovules themselves have 2 integuments. I covered that at the top of the class. Now we're looking just at an angiosperm ovule. Notice, just so you don't get confused, it is, the way I get oriented is I always look for the micropyle. That's that hole where sperm's going to be able to enter. So sometimes, depending on what diagram we're looking at, it may be reversed, right? So like here, the micropyle is on this side, right? Just so you know, depends on what we're looking at. What is inside of an angiosperm ovule? Well, inside is a very reduced microscopic female gametophyte plant. So we can no longer see the female gametophyte plant with our eyes even. We need a microscope to be able to see her. That's how small they are in angiosperms. And the female gametophyte plant's been so reduced that now she only consists of 8 cells. 8 cells. And those 8 cells include 2 polar nuclei and 1 egg. And I think I might have lost, maybe I lost some things here, but 8 cells total. So the female gametophyte plant is composed of 3 antipodal cells, 2 synergid cells, 2 polar nuclei, and 1 egg, for 8 total. 8 total. And all of those things are inside of a central cell. So that whole structure is one female gametophyte plant. 8 cells. I don't want you to be confused. So this is the outside of a single cell, but in these nuclei are the nuclei of that cell. So it's, yeah, it's like 8, just say 8 cells. Just say 8 cells for the purposes of this class. 8 cells. Female gametophyte of angiosperms composed of 8 cells, period. If we were to remove the walls of an ovary, and we would be able to see the ovules inside. So here on the left, we removed the walls of an ovary of a lily. And here's like 1 ovule here, here's 1 ovule here, etc. And we're actually going to look at this one. This is that one close up of that ovule. We're going to look a little bit about what happened. So you have this developing ovule that goes through different stages. I don't know how detailed we need to go through for this class, but the point is, at the end of this ovule development, you end up with a female gametophyte with 8 cells. The book does cover this a little bit, but I found the way the book described it to be a bit confusing, honestly. So I don't need you to know the steps of how the female gametophyte plant in angiosperms ends up with 8 cells. You don't need to know that for this class. Just know that the female gametophyte in angiosperms is composed of 8 cells. Here is a microscope of a female gametophyte of an angiosperm. And so, yep, I guess most important for us is just to point out that, like, you know, she still has an egg cell that needs to be fertilized in order for the ovule to become a seed and for the next generation to grow. So those are the parts of the ovule. Now we're going to look at pollen a little bit, which is the part of the male stuff. And that's from the stamen, right? So these are both stamens in these red boxes. The stamens are composed of anthers, which are where pollen is made, and a filament that just holds the anthers out of the flower. And just like the female gametophyte plant has been reduced to only 8 cells, the male gametophyte plant has been reduced even smaller into only 2 cells, which is very, very small. The male gametophyte plant now consists of a pollen tube cell, which my head is probably blocking, but this, oh, black's not a good color to use on this here. So this whole thing is a pollen tube cell. This is the nucleus of the pollen tube cell. And inside of that cell is this other cell that's called a generative cell. And the pollen tube cell is going to grow a pollen tube down the style of the pistil / carpel. And once that pollen tube grows down, this generative cell is going to generate 2 sperm that will be each fighting to fertilize the egg. So this is a cross section through an anther. So if you look on the left here, this is, I guess yellow is not a good color, I'll use blue. Right here is one anther here. It's being held up by a filament. Here's another anther here being held up by a filament, etc. In the center here, you have, this is the top of the stigma where pollen's going to land, and the style, which is what the pollen tube cell will grow down once pollen lands there. But we're focused on anthers right now. Here's another anther in the back. Imagine we did a cross section through this anther. That's what we're seeing here. And each anther has a total of 4 microsporangia. And when you do a cross section, it almost looks like a butterfly, right? So like each of these, this is 1 microsporangia, this is 1 microsporangia, etc. There's 4 total. And if you look at it under the microscope side, it kind of looks like the shape of a butterfly, as shown here, kind of, right? Weird butterfly. And so inside of each of those microsporangia, look, there's 4 of them there. Inside of each one are those microspore mother cells that are 2N, and those are going to be what undergoes meiosis, right? So your 2N microspore mother cells undergo meiosis to make a tetrad of microspores, each of which are 1N. We just talk about 1 spore, right? That spore is actually going to, this is all happening inside of the microsporangia. That spore is going to undergo mitosis to make 1 more cell to make your 2-celled reduced male gametophyte plant, the pollen grain. So we've covered just this, we've covered this in other plants we've encountered. This is the same exact process, right? You have microspore mother cells inside of a sporangia. They undergo meiosis to make tetrad of spores, all of which are haploid. And then we talk about just one of those haploid spores. We've gone through that process several times. The only thing that's added in this angiosperm scenario is then there's 1 round of mitosis so that your finished pollen grain has 2 cells. Has 2 cells. That's the only difference. Eventually, once those pollen grains are ready, the microsporangia is going to open and all the pollen grain cells will leave. Pollen grains will leave. And they're going to be Oh, my head is hiding this, but it says pollen grain is released from microsporangium, which is what I just said. So here we go, top of this anther, one of those microsporangia, pollen grains are ready, and so pollen grain leaves, right? Leaves. And it leaves via different ways. However, the pollen gets brought from the anther to a stigma is called the agent of pollination. So in order to get pollen from an anther to a stigma, you need an agent of pollination. That's what I was saying at the top of the class, right? Like agent of pollination, right? Sounds like a spy movie. And with that agent of pollination, and we're going to talk about different examples of agents of pollination in a second, but once the pollen gets brought from the anther to a stigma, that's pollination. Transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma. And here's what it might look like. So this is a scanning electron microscope, and it's showing you this is the top of a stigma, and all of those little yellow balls are pollen. So those pollen grains have been transferred to the top of that stigma. Pollination has occurred. Pollination has occurred. Agents of pollination, what are they? Well, there's different types. So how does a pollen grain go from an anther to a stigma? Well, it can go via abiotic agents such as wind and water. Abiotic, A just means without. So without biotic, so not alive. That's a fancy way of saying not alive, right? So water is not alive and wind is not alive. So water and wind can be agents of pollination, but we're probably more familiar when we think of pollination, we're probably more familiar with biotic agents. So insects, birds, reptiles, small mammals, even bats. So here is pollination occurring via wind on the left and via water on the right. All of that stuff that's flying and floating that's yellow is pollen. Here's an example that you're probably more familiar with your bees, wasps, moths, and butterflies. You could even have pollination via beetles and flies, like I mentioned earlier with that corpse lily. Hummingbirds and other birds can serve as agents of pollination. Reptiles, bats. Oh, I love this slide. Look at the bat's face. It's so cute. Yeah, bats can be agents of pollination. Other small mammals too, like these little mice things, can also be agents of pollination. But look at all the pollen on this bat, right? Like, look at all that. And then it goes to another flower to eat the nectar and puts all that pollen right on that stigma. So whether it's wind, water, bats, moths, flies, small mice things, one way or the other, the pollen grains get from an anther to the top of a stigma, and that's pollination. Once pollination occurs, the pollen grain, which is made up of that pollen tube cell and generative cell, is going to grow a pollen tube. So here you go. This is what this is showing you. The top here, this is a pollen grain that has landed on a stigma. And now that pollen grain is going to absorb water from the surface of the stigma, which will allow it to grow a pollen tube cell that will grow down the style of the pistil/carpels, right? That's what the text says here at the bottom. Here is what one would look like under the microscope. So here's a pollen grain that is landed on top of a stigma. This is the pollen tube cell that is growing down the stigma. As the pollen tube cell is growing down the stigma, down the style, as the pollen tube cell is growing down the style, that generative cell is going to make those two sperm cells. And these sperm cells can't swim anymore. They'll just move down the style into the ovary as the pollen tube cell grows. So the pollen tube cell will just literally bring them down there. Okay. This is what we were just looking. Oh, I did it again. Too many things. Share. This is what we were just looking at. Here's that pollen grain that has landed on top of the stigma. It's absorbed water from the stigma. It's going to grow pollen tube cell down until down until it meets an ovule. And that's as it grows down, it's going to bring those sperm down with it. Once the pollen tube reaches an ovule, the pollen tube is going to go into that hole, that micropyle hole of the ovule. And the 2 sperm cells are going to get released into the ovule. Now, you might think, right? Inside of that ovule is 1 egg, but there's 2 sperm here. So what are we going to do about this? The math doesn't add up, right? And you're right, it doesn't. So what ends up happening, so look, here you go. You have your egg waiting. Here's the egg. Here are your 2 sperm that are starting to come down here via the pollen tube cell. And notice the pollen tube cell entered the ovule via the micropyle hole, right? So it says over here. Two sperm cells are going to get released into the ovule. And what's going to happen is one of these sperm will fertilize the egg. And the other sperm is going to fuse with the 2 polar nuclei. And I'll show you what happens because of that. So 1 sperm fuses with egg, shown here. There's a sperm and egg fused to make your 2N zygote, right? Which we're used to already. Sperm plus egg equals 2N zygote. The other sperm is going to fuse with those polar nuclei to make what's called endosperm, which is 3N. This is a new thing, triploid, 3N. And even though words like endosperm and triploid and polar nuclei may seem scary, that what it actually is not scary. So, this, and by the way, this, you have 2 sperm. 1 sperm is going to fuse with an egg. 1 sperm is going to fuse with the polar nuclei. So you have 2 fusion events involving sperm inside of 1 ovule, and we call that double fertilization. Double fertilization, because you have 1 sperm fusing with an egg to make a zygote and 1 sperm fusing with the polar nuclei to make that endosperm, which is 3N. As I was saying, things like endosperm, polar nuclei, that might sound scary, but what actually happens from double fertilization? Well, you get a zygote, right? 2N zygote, which we're used to. That 2N zygote's gonna grow via mitosis, right? Grow into the new sporophyte plant. It'll grow into an embryo, then it'll grow into a new sporophyte plant. We're used to that. The endosperm basically just serves as a food source for that developing zygote. So it's almost like in the angiosperms, like you pack the kid a lunch, right? You got this zygote, 2N zygote, and it needs stuff, it needs nourishment to grow and do mitosis. And so that nourishment comes from that endosperm. Serves as food for the zygote. Okay. So that's how we get from, oh, and in case I didn't make it clear enough, look at the bottom here. In case I didn't make it clear enough, down here. This is an ovule. This is an ovule, right? We still have egg inside, so it's an ovule. Once double fertilization occurs, look, from an ovule to a what? To a seed. So once you have a 2N zygote and a 3N endosperm, it's no longer an ovule, it's a seed. And so that's how we get from an ovule to a seed. And in the flower lecture, we covered how you get from a flower to a fruit. And we saw a bunch of really cool time-lapse videos of a flower turning into a fruit, right? But just for a little bit of an overview, if you look at the bottom here, you have a flower. Inside the flower, you have the ovule develop. And in that ovule will be the reduced female gametophyte plant with egg. On the flower, you have pollen grain development, which occurs in the anthers. Eventually, the ovule is mature and the pollen grain is ready to be released. There's going to be some agent of pollination, maybe a bee or a butterfly, that's going to bring the pollen grain to the tip of the stigma. Pollen tube cell is going to grow down. Sperm is going to travel with it. Pollen tube cell is going to enter an ovule. Sperm will get released. One sperm fuses with an egg. One sperm fuses with polar nuclei. Double fertilization. And boom, now we have seeds inside a fruit, right? Because the flower, just as the ovules will be seeds, as soon as that occurs, the flower will begin to turn into a fruit, which we saw before. And go back to those time lapse if you don't believe that we looked at a lecture 4. And of course, my head is blocking the seedling, but basically, yeah, so you have, should be, I think, pretty intuitive at this point, right? Here's your seed. Inside of the seed, which we already learned, you have your embryo, right? That's your young sporophyte plant. Eventually, the seed will germinate and the young sporophyte plant will grow roots and a shoot to become the new mature sporophyte plant. All right, this is an overview of what I just went over. However, it's all on one slide. This is from your book. So this may be, this way may make more sense to you. I'm not sure, but I'm including it here just so you know that there is a resource in your book that goes through all these things I just talked about with the angiosperm alternation of generations. And perhaps looking at this makes more sense to you. Okay, so we're almost done here. Yay. So I do have, so I know that you guys are all doing your own careers and let me share here. I know you guys aren't studying plants and you're doing all your careers and things, but I just want to let you know that in case you ever have a new path and you want to explore something different, there's a website here that's in the PowerPoint that helps you find careers in working with plants. So what you can do is you can go to this website and there's a lot of different information about different types of jobs working with plants. They don't always require a lot of, like a lot of these don't require anything like grad school. Some of these things would require maybe an undergrad degree, but maybe not even working necessarily with plants. But you can select here on the left what type of degree you have. So let's say I pick associate's degree, science and engineering. Then it gives you more selections here. Let's say I wanted to do art and design, right, and fashion, etc. And you would go. And it gives you ideas, right? But either way, I wanted you guys to see this thing, map your career with plants, fast growing careers with plants, top companies for people who love plants, right? Green thumb internships, in case you guys are interested in pursuing something different. That's the only reason I wanted to include that. And then the last thing that I'm going to do here is, if I can, where did you guys go? Here, stop share. Is we're gonna watch just a little brief movie. It's not the right thing. I want to share this with sound. Share. About pollination. And yeah, I will probably turn my camera off for some of this so you guys cannot be distracted by me. I have it low, but just if you're using earbuds, be careful. I am going to turn on, and I do have sound here, so just be careful for a second. And I'm going to start it right now.
It's great being here at TED. You know, I think there might be some presentations that'll go over my head, but the most amazing concepts are the ones that go right under my feet. The little things in life, sometimes that we forget about, like pollination, that we take for granted. And you can't tell the story about pollinators, bees, bats, hummingbirds, butterflies, without telling the story about the invention of flowers and how they co-evolved over 50 million years. I've been filming time-lapse flowers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for over 35 years. To watch them move is a dance I'm never going to get tired of. It fills me with wonder and it opens my heart. Beauty and seduction, I believe, is nature's tool for survival because we will protect what we fall in love with. Their relationship is a love story that feeds the earth. It reminds us that we are a part of nature and we're not separate from it. When I heard about the vanishing bees colony collapse disorder, it motivated me to take action. We depend on pollinators for over a third of the fruits and vegetables we eat. And many scientists believe it's the most serious issue facing mankind. It's like the canary in the coal mine. If they disappear, so do we. It reminds us that we are a part of nature and we need to take care of it. What motivated me to film their behavior was something that I asked my scientific advisors. What motivates the pollinators? Well, their answer was, it's all about risk and reward. And like a wide-eyed kid, I'd say, why is that? And they say, well, because they want to survive. And I go, why? Well, in order to reproduce. Well, why? And I thought that they'd probably say, well, it's all about sex. And Chip Taylor, our monarch butterfly expert, he replied, nothing lasts forever. Everything in the universe wears out. And that blew my mind because I realized that nature had invented reproduction as a mechanism for life to move forward, as a life force that passes right through us and makes us a link in the evolution of life. Rarely seen by the naked eye, this intersection between the animal world and the plant world is truly a magic moment. It's the mystical moment where life regenerates itself over and over again. So here is some nectar from my film. I hope you'll drink, tweet, and plant some seeds in a pollinator-friendly garden. And always take time to smell the flowers and let it fill you with beauty and rediscover that sense of wonder. Here are some images from the film.
Oh, sorry. I just want to turn down the music a little bit in case I want to annotate or in case I want to point anything out to you. Sorry about that. So those are actually bees. Those little green things are actually bees, believe it or not. Oh, this part's super cool. This is about bat pollination. And I think one of these bats has a baby on it. Hold on. Let's see. Oh, yep. Bat baby. So I don't know if you guys knew this, but monarch butterflies, every single year they go to this one forest in Mexico to breed. And when they go there, so every year they journey all the way back. And when they go there, they are so prevalent on the trees that the trees actually like hang down with the weight of all these monarch butterflies. But if you ever see a monarch butterfly in New Jersey, one day it's gonna go back to Mexico forest every year. And stay here, whoops. Okay. All right, so hopefully you guys enjoyed that little video. It's just so cool because it's all this time-lapse photography showing these incredible shots of these animals flying. It's just crazy. Okay, so let's just finish this up. So that's the link for those plant-based careers. That's the link for that hidden beauty of pollination video. And that's it. We did it. That is the last lecture of the basic plant science course for this summer. There is a quiz available for this lecture on Canvas now, and it's due by Friday before midnight. And just a few other reminders. On Wednesday the 7th, so you have an assignment due, a quiz due by Friday. And then we do not have class on the 5th because of 4th of July is being recognized on that day. So you'll have a time off for that, but then starting on the 7th of July at 6 p.m., lecture exam 2 will be available to you. It's going to run just like lecture exam 1 ran. There's already a study guide posted on Canvas, so make sure you look at that. And then the exam will be available starting Wednesday at 6 p.m. and it'll be due by Friday the 9th before midnight. And because I'm giving you guys 2 days, basically more than 2 days to do this, there's no excuses. So no late exams are submitted or no late submissions will be accepted or graded. You guys got to get it in on time. You have 2 whole days. You'll have the same amount of time as you did to complete it once you begin it, just like on the other exam. So with all that aside, I just want to say It's really been my pleasure to teach you guys about plants this summer. And I really do wish you all the best in all that you pursue. And I just want you to stay strong and don't give up. It's, you know, the world's always going to throw stuff at us, and we just got to keep dusting ourselves off and go forward. And I just want to thank you all for such a wonderful semester, and have a great rest of your summer. And I'll talk to you on the discussion boards. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for this summer.